the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Prazdnikam. In preparation of this homily, I actually released the Holy Matrix a few weeks ago so I could find out who was the most sinful in all of the Orthodox Church. And lo and behold, 4 out of 5 feminists agree that it is actually me, Father Moses. I am actually the most sinful and worst priest in all of America, which is actually true. So it's not, it was confirmation bias, I guess. What can I say about the gospel today? We preaching on the Publican and the Pharisee. There's a couple things that I want to say, because I think it's one of the things that I would say is it is about shaping our mind and the direction of our mind and the direction of our thoughts and how we process the world. What I mean by that is, when we look at the attitude of the Pharisee, it is not that the Pharisee doesn't do anything good, right? This is very clear from the Pharisee's own words. He's like, look, I fast, I pray, I give tithe, I do all these things, right? So the Pharisee is not, how can we put it? He's not, in an external sense of the word, he's a spiritual man, right? Or you could at least say he's a religious man. He is a devoted person. That's not his problem. The problem, and when I was thinking about this, is actually much and very much like how our culture is structured. Our culture is structured in such a way that we're constantly looking, judging, and measuring other people. That is one of the hallmarks when you look online and you look at the culture of the news, right? The news is extremely polemic in our society. And not just is it polemic, but it is very derogatory to anyone who doesn't agree with one side or the other, right? So if you go on CNN, it's like what? All these mega people are delusional, they're all morons, they're all whatever. And then you go on Fox News, and Fox News is like what? These are all libtards, nobody can think for themselves, they're communists, whatever else, yada yada, right? So the point is that in the news and in the way that our society is structured, in the way that kind of the American ethos is, it's very interesting, because even down to religion in America, in Protestantism, the idea is very much, what is it? The idea in Protestantism, when you really think about it, people confess it, is really what? Only I will be saved, and everybody around me is going to hell. Everyone else is going to hell, but I'm going to heaven. It's a very sure and deliberate and kind of, how can we put it? Well, it's judgmental at the very least, right?
Self-righteous.
It's self-righteous. That's a great word. And so it is that when we actually come to the Gospels and we read the two, the Publican and the Pharisee, we encounter the Pharisee, who we know is a religious person and has all these quote-unquote kind of good deeds. But then we come to the tax collector, and if you know anything about the culture at the time, tax collectors were absolutely considered the scum of the earth. I'm not saying that has left. I'm not saying anything about today's tax collectors. I'm just saying historically at the time, one of the ways that tax collectors would make money, right, was that they would lie. We can see this in the Gospels when we see last Sunday Nicodemus or Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus says, hey, if I've wronged anybody, meaning I've lied, I've taken advantage of them. It was a known practice that the tax collectors would move and modify the scales and throw things off in order to collect more money from people. And so especially like last Sunday with Zacchaeus, who was a Jew, Jewish tax collectors were like particularly hated by the Jewish people, okay? But today we see the tax collector, who is the most low of the low in a lot of ways of society, and yet he's the one who's looking at God, and he says he cannot raise his eyes to heaven, but beats his breast saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Christ, at the last sentence, this is Luke 18, verse 14, says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The mindset, and this is the shift that a lot of people kind of undergo when they come to the Orthodox Church, or they're supposed to undergo, and there's a great meme about it, but it basically says something like, I've discovered that there's something wrong in the world, and so I fled to the Orthodox Church. And then the next box is, unfortunately, I found out I am actually the problem. The purpose of our life in the church is to get our eyes off of everyone else. Notice that the Pharisee, when he's in church, essentially in the temple, he's what? He's not looking towards God. He's looking towards somebody else. He's physically looking at somebody else. And so it is that when we look at God, one of the things that happens is that we are illumined by God. And this is the byproduct, I would say, when we talk about this kind of holy illumination that happens. When we read the lives of the saints and the prayers of the saints, it's so interesting because the saints see themselves with such profound depth of sinfulness. When you read their prayers, and oftentimes this happens when, like for instance, I'll be reading the prayers of Saint Basil the Great. We literally call him Saint Basil the Great. He's like one of the great spiritual fathers and church fathers of the church, and was an absolute titan of holiness and piety. And yet, when I'm reading his prayers as a priest, he's literally praying and saying, God, do not withhold your grace from this service because of my unworthiness. And so it is that we see in the lives of the saints, and when we pray the prayers of the saints, we see that not we are humble. It's actually that what we see is that the saints are so supremely humble. They see themselves with such great clarity. That light of Christ which illumines is what? When somebody says, I'm pretty good, or I'm a good person, this is like the hallmark of society. Like, so many people say this, right? Like, I don't need to go to religion, I'm spiritual. I don't need church, I'm a good person. This understanding is the fact that the light is a far way off. It's kind of like when you go into a room and the lights are out in the room and you're kind of like wandering around and somebody says, is it clean? You're like, I think so. I don't know, right? But if you crack the blinds open a little bit, you can kind of see the room. You're like, it's not that put together. But what if we turn on the lights? Now you're like, oof, right? Now what if we turn on the black light and we see every molecule, everything in the room, everything starts to get revealed. Now what do we see? We're like, man, this room is filthy. This is disgusting. We become disgusted with its filthiness the more that it's illumined. But when it's not illumined, we don't become disgusted. We're comfortable, right? It's like that thing. It's like, would you sleep in this bed? It's like, sure, it looks clean, right? Would you sleep in your child's bed? You're like, yeah, I put them down, I lay down in their bed at night, it's probably clean. And it's like, okay, put a black light on that. You're like, whoa, like those sheets definitely need to get changed. You know what I mean? It's not. But we don't see it when we're not illumined, when we're not enlightened. We don't see it when we're looking at other people. We don't see it when we're judging other people, when we're measuring up where they are in their life and what they're doing wrong and this and that compared to me and what I'm doing or what I think or how I think it should be done. Nobody's ever going to measure up if we're thinking about them or looking at them. And that's just a reality. The purpose of the spiritual life is what? Not to take our physical eyes, that is part of it, but take the eyes of our heart, the noetic eyes of our soul, and to stop looking and judging the people around us and what they're doing. You often find this a lot, I think, with people when you're growing up as a child. You look at your parents and you're like, oh, they're getting angry. Oh, they're falling short. Oh, they're doing this. They're irritable. Oh, they're snappy. Oh, my, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then it's like, fast forward 20 years, and you have your own kids. You're like, ooh, this is real humbling, isn't it? You know what I mean? This is a lot harder than I thought it was. I realized my parents were probably doing their best. They probably made mistakes and did whatever else, but at the time I was so judgmental because I thought I was better, I would do better. And in some ways, yeah, maybe we do a bit better than our parents, but guess what? Parenting is absolutely humbling. People always say this, they're like, what if I come to church and my kids are noisy? I'm like, don't worry. All of us have been embarrassed by our children in church. Everybody who has children gets equally embarrassed and humbled at some point. It's a reality. And you know what? That's okay. When you're part of the family of God, it's okay to be humbled. It's okay to be embarrassed. It's okay for us to make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. It isn't. The thing is that we have to continue to keep on repenting. The only way for us to do that, as we hear about in today's gospel, and why the church is reading this before Great Lent, is saying what? Spend your time in Great Lent looking and judging your own heart, your own life, the own ways that you fall short. It's oftentimes our pride and our ego that get in the way. It's oftentimes our desire to kind of preserve our ego that keeps us from hearing the truth. We don't want to see ourselves as we really are. And I said this joke at the beginning about the internet, but this is something I really struggled with when I was a new priest. You know, someone would criticize me or say something about me. And I remember thinking on it one time, somebody said something very malicious, whatever. And it was just in the local parish, did something or said something. And I remember I was so wounded by it, like, man, how could they say that? Like, you know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. And then I really sat there and thought about it. And I was like, can I argue with them? You know, somebody says, like, you're a terrible priest. What am I supposed to say? Like, you're wrong. I'm a great priest. You know what I mean? Like, what am I supposed to say? It's the priesthood of Christ. It's his priesthood. And I'm an idiot. So it's like, if somebody's like, you're not doing a great job, Father, I'd be like, that's probably accurate. If they're like, you're a bad priest, I'd be like, compared to who I'm supposed to be, I'm terrible. I'm atrocious. What else am I supposed to say, right? And I realized it was all my pride and my ego, and I wanted other people to see me as being a good priest or doing my job or working hard, or I cared about them or this or that. I wanted them to see my virtue, and they weren't. They were seeing my sinfulness, but they weren't seeing me incorrectly. They didn't have a bad read on me. They had an accurate read on me, right? It's not like I go home and I pray and I'm like, oh Lord, thank you, I'm such a wonderful priest. I can't believe you made me the way that I am. You know what I mean? And I think about this because I was in seminary one time and I had this priest and he did something and he just acted in a very bad way, poor behavior. And it was objectively poor behavior. And I remember I called my spiritual mother and I complained to her on the phone. I said, oh, this priest did this thing. It just riled me up. And he said this. It was so rude and so out of line, blah, 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 blah. And she was like, stop. She said, you don't know how he prays at night. And I was like, what do you mean, Mother? She says, you do not know how he prays at night. She says, if you want to lose God's grace, you judge other people, and specifically, you judge a priest. Because I thought about it afterwards, and I went, you know what? This guy may go home every night and bawl his eyes out because he's fallen short. And he knows that he's falling short. And here I am judging him and condemning him because he's irritated and offended me and was rude to me. And so now my pride is wounded because he was rude to me, and I'm judging him, and now I'm losing God's grace because God isn't pleased with me because I'm judging somebody else. Meanwhile, he keeps falling short, but he's repenting, and he's receiving God's grace. I'm like, Lord have mercy, this church is so upside down. Everything that makes sense doesn't make sense. Everything that doesn't make sense makes sense. This is the life of the Christian as we head into Great and Holy Lent. The purpose in Lent is not to discover how sinful everybody around you is, how much everybody else falls short, how much, you know that saying, like when you're reading a spiritual book and you think, oh, I should really share this with my wife or my husband. They really need to hear this, right? That's not the purpose of reading spiritual books. I remember I read like 2 or 3 spiritual books before I read somebody who was like, if you're reading spiritual books and you think other people need to hear it, you are delusional. It's like, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, every book I read is about everybody around me, you know what I mean? And I was like, I'm serious. Like the first 2 or 3 spiritual books, almost 20 years ago, I read like Orthodox spiritual books from the saints. I was like, oh my goodness, this is my dad. Oh, this is my mom. Oh, this person, this friend of mine. Oh my goodness, he's so this. Like every page was people I know. And the only person I never kept stumbling on was myself, I wasn't finding myself in the writings of the saints. And so it is, brothers and sisters, I say all this in kind of a playful and joyful way, but in a way that needs to be taken very seriously. When we enter Great and Holy Lent, the purpose of our life in Lent is to fasten our eyes on Christ, to ask him to show us our sinfulness. Show us what is wrong with us. Show me my sins. Show me where I'm falling short. Illumine me with your light. And help me not to look and to judge anybody around me. Help me to keep my eyes off of what they're doing, whether they're fasting, whether they're not fasting, whether they're falling short, whether whatever. It is not important at all. It is not important at all. The number one thing I should be doing in Great and Holy Lent is spending my time looking at myself, repenting over my own sins, my own weaknesses, my own faults, my own foibles, the things that I should be doing better, the ways in which I fall short, and the things that I need to do to please God. I pray that this time of Great and Holy Lent would be valuable to you, because what we experience in Lent needs to be carried out into all of our life, all year round, in the way that we conduct ourselves as Christians, which is first of all to be hard on ourselves and to be easy on other people. Amen.